say, racist illustrations of African slaves and Haitian leaders, actually, in the books that had blatantly, some of these textbooks had blatantly wrong, incorrect information about Haiti and things like that. And this was 8 years ago. And so now there's a new national curriculum, but at the time, a graduating high school senior, graduating from Dominican high school, would have taken some sort of unit in like a social studies class on Dominican-American relations. Never would they have taken any sort of unit, at least not mandatory, on Dominican-Haitian relations. And it's, it's just this really interesting dynamic to me. You have two countries stuck on an island, and this is somewhat true in Haiti too, but certainly in the Dominican Republic, which I've studied, there's just very little attention paid to Haiti, given that they're stuck on an island with Haiti, I think. So I find that very interesting. I'd love to hear people's thoughts about that, if people disagree with kind of my very rushed kind of presentation of different ways in which Dominican society discuss Haitian and Haitian topics. But what I'm working on now is the latest iteration of all this is that over the past 10 years, the Dominican Republic has progressively started to exclude a group of people from Dominican citizenship who are descendants of Haitians, right? So people whose grandfathers and grandmothers worked sugarcane, came over years ago, came under Trujillo decades and decades ago. The question is, do we grant, are these people allowed to be Dominican? And that's being asked not just publicly in media in the Dominican Republic, but also now legally. So over the past 10 years, there's been a series of court decisions, of legislation, and presidential decrees that combined have essentially taken a large group of people who are born in the Dominican Republic, hundreds of thousands of people, who are now being told you are not Dominican because your parents came from Haiti. And these are people, for the most part, the majority, they don't speak Creole anymore. There's several generations down. Most of them have never been to Haiti. So it'd be like, coming here, and if there are descendants here of, German immigrants or Polish immigrants, people who don't speak German or Polish, and we're being told, okay, you're not American anymore, and you may in fact be deported back to Poland or Germany, in the coming months. I mean, that's what's happening with some of these people. And so I'm writing about the situation, writing about the legalities of it a little bit. But there's a situation in which, by best estimates, 230,000 people in the Dominican Republic, born in the Dominican Republic, are now at risk of being stateless. And so this has been in the news a little bit, talking about a new class of stateless people. Now some conservatives would argue, conservatives on the issue of immigration would argue these people were always meant to be Haitian and not Dominican in the first place. Legally, that doesn't really stand up for the most part. I'm writing about that. Dominican courts have ruled that that's the case, but international courts have largely said that's not true at all. It's still a little bit up for debate, but basically, pretty recently, it's been codified into law that these people, 230,000 people, are not Dominican, even though they were born here and they went to school here or there, and all of that. And so it's a big question of people being excluded from the society that they've lived their whole lives in. And then the question of what will happen. Will the Dominican Republic indeed try to deport some of these people to a foreign country? So we only have a little time left, so I'm going to open up to questions, but I'm happy to talk more about this or anything about Haiti. I just want to make sure there's nothing I'm forgetting about that I absolutely have to mention. You can skip most of this stuff. I'll leave that up there if people have to leave. These are just some book recommendations and journalists you guys could follow for future, further reading on Haiti and the Dominican Republic. I'll leave that up there in case people are interested in any of these people or writers. But I'd love to open it up to questions on any of this, or comments.
Just following up on what you just said.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the Cherokee Nation expelling the freedmen from their organization.
Mm.
Even though historically they were part of the same entity.
Mm. Interesting.
Where does it stand? There was an international court that actually weighed in on this. The Supreme Court of the Dominican Republic.
So in September 2013, the Dominican Constitutional Court ruled that descendants of Haitian immigrants were essentially Haitian, or at least not Dominican. In response, the IACHR, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights in Washington, D.C., has ruled that the Dominican Republic, by saying that, is in gross violation of its own obligations under the American under the international laws to which the court, the Human Rights Convention. Yeah, exactly. And so this international body that does have jurisdiction over the Dominican Republic, because the Dominican Republic is a member, has ruled over the course of a couple rulings recently that one, the Dominican Republic is in violation of its own laws, and it's in violation of that international law, and that it needs to revise its own law to conform with international law. But the Dominican Republic has largely rejected that idea that it should do that, and there have even been attempts to remove the Dominican Republic from that convention so that it wouldn't be obligated under those rules. So it's, that's kind of where it stands. Where it stands is Dominican law has become, over the past 10 years, very clear. It never used to be very clear, but now it's been codified into law that these people are not Dominicans. And then you have international bodies saying legally they absolutely are Dominicans, and that's kind of where it stands now.
Has the American government brought any pressure on the Dominican Republic? For in Haiti, I was at strings attached to it, and that's one that they would have had.
They really haven't, and that's really interesting. So I was able to interview some State Department officials, but no one has said anything on the record. And so even in my interviews with them, I can't quote them as whatever they're saying. I mean, these individuals were concerned about that, but the U.S. State Department hasn't taken any really much of a public stance on it at all, other than expressing concern once about the possibility of stateless people. But no, the State Department hasn't stepped up to do that, and still isn't, because they wouldn't let me quote them on the record actually for this story. So yeah.
Has there been any sort of reaction, official or otherwise, from Haiti on this issue?
Yeah, so okay, and if you're on the island, I mean, some of the most fascinating news now is following these Dominican-Haitian relations, right? I mean, there was an incident recently in which a Haitian man in the Dominican Republic was lynched, and it's not clear whether it was Dominicans who did that or other Haitians or whatever, but the point is it stirred a series of events where a Dominican group burned a Haitian flag recently in Santiago publicly, and of course any even minor event, must have been like a dozen people, but of course it got covered in the Haitian media as these Dominicans who are anti-Haitian. So then a much larger group of Haitian protesters burned a Dominican flag, attacked the Dominican consulate. The Dominican ambassador had to actually flee back to the DR from Haiti. I mean, these sorts of things happen all the time, and it's very much in the news. And so Haitians are very much the Haitians who are in Haiti aren't as concerned about the stateless thing as the Dominicans, who are of Haitian descent, who are now being called Haitian, right? But in other ways, in trade, in issues that revolve around the border, these sorts of things are very much in the news, and I think Haitians feel very much kind of victimized by the Dominican Republic, but in some ways that aren't fair, though, or not necessarily, I think. But it's just interesting. I think most Dominican friends of mine and families I've lived with have this sense of the Dominican Republic being kind of a patron of Haiti, and we've, after the earthquake, we've given so much money and so much assistance. We helped them economically in all sorts of ways, and many of those are very truth statements. But then it's interesting to see that disconnect between. I feel like, I don't think anyone would say it, but I feel like that's almost said as a justification for not helping Haitians, as they call them, who are in the Dominican Republic. We're sending schools, building schools, sending supplies over to Haiti. Look at what we're doing. I think there's this, general eagerness. You can see it in the media. You can see it by popular politics to ignore the plight of this very, very large group of people who are in the Dominican Republic, descendants of Haitians.
If they want our help, they should go back to Haiti.
Yeah, and so what's interesting is, this. As of very recently, majority Dominican society, in a poll that was conducted, said that people born to Haitian parents should be Dominican. These people who were born in the Dominican Republic, speak Spanish, went to school with my kids, they're Dominican. So if you ask them kind of straightforward in a poll, most Dominicans would agree with you. But this very ultra-nationalist group, which has very strong ties to the current ruling party, has kind of shifted discussion a lot to ask things like, should we give nationality to kids of Haitian descent? Which isn't really an accurate question because they already have that. But by shifting the discourse very, very well, a relatively small group of kind of nationalists that have directly have the ear of the president, actually a high up advisor to the president, is the founder of this party. They've kind of been working the discourse the other way. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this group of people and whether the Dominican Republic will indeed start deporting people to Haiti who have never been there, and which could happen as early as June, I think, if I remember the deadline. I mean, theoretically, the Dominican Republic, by its own interpretation of its laws, has said that they can start deporting people if they want as of June, I think, or July. Yeah.
Two questions. One, is any part of the border contested?
No, I can just answer that quick. No, I mean, historically, yes. Historians may have very interesting arguments about the border, actually, but no, there's not really any fighting over the border right now.
And the other thing, the Haitians that they want out, were they mostly employed and were they in jobs?
Right. I forgot to mention.
And those jobs, with those jobs,
I'm so glad you mentioned this. I mean, this is what drives all of Haitian immigration throughout history to the DR has been jobs, right? From sugarcane to now, most of the Dominican construction sector is made up of Haitians, and a lot of the tourism sector is made up of Haitian employees. When I say Haitian, I'm talking of a Dominican's definition of Haitian, which usually means Haitians or people who look Haitian, right? But and so it's just huge. I mean, the Dominican Republic is literally being built by Haitians. The majority of construction workers are Haitian. So it's a similar dynamic, but even more intense than I think we see in the U.S. when we're talking about immigrants coming and doing jobs that are, that Americans aren't as eager to do. It's like that times 10, I would say, in the Dominican Republic. I mean, it's just so many industries are dominated by Haitian or descendants of Haitians working in them. So that's what's driving current immigration. And that's what, if you disagree that these people should be Dominican, what your argument is, you kind of conflate historical immigration with current immigration. So you say we have a crisis. We have tens of thousands of more Haitians coming all the time. This is bad for our economy. They're taking our jobs. You would tend to buy into these arguments. But you would conflate that with historical immigration. So to you, to those conservatives, people who were born here because their parents were immigrants, they're also immigrants. They're in that same group. They're foreign, they're immigrants, and we have enough of them already. We should close the border better and send a lot of them back in many cases. So, yeah. Are there other questions or comments? It's a mix. So I went, okay, this wasn't at all statistically significant or anything. This was kind of a practice for a sophomore in college to learn the scientific method when it comes to field research. But I did go to a few public high schools, private high schools, and I think they had some kind of strange high schools that are kind of a mix somehow. I can't remember. And I went to them all over the Cibao region of the Dominican Republic, which is kind of the northern region around the city of Santiago. So there were some urban schools, there were some rural schools. So I was looking at the differences, right? And what accounted for the biggest differences in terms of what people knew about Haiti and Haitians actually had nothing to do with private or public school. It had more to do with how many friends do they have or how many people do they know who are Haitian, and like who they actually hang out with who are Haitian or of Haitian descent or something like that. Those students seem to know more, have better a better idea of Dominican heritage and ethnic heritage and that sort of thing. Yeah, but sure.
You've not mentioned race at any point, and it's probably because it hasn't come up. But much of this is tinged by race. Can you comment on
So I was also trying to figure that out with my research. I mean, is this, I think it's too easy to say, okay, this comes because Dominicans are racist against Haitians. I think that's much smaller. I mean, I don't think that's nearly as true as it is true to say Dominicans are xenophobic against Haitians in the same way that I think many Americans are xenophobic against Mexicans, the outsider, the foreigner. I think race is above all used as a way to distinguish, who this outsider is. But it would be wrong to ignore the fact that there have been, that's certainly like racial ideology, factors into all this. But it's so complicated to explain it. People are always debating whether or not this comes from racism or not. And it's, Dominicans can say very accurately that, Dominicans span such a wide range of racial, skin tones and ancestry. And, a very dark Dominican might be called, or a semi-dark one might be called moreno, a very dark one might be called prieto, or terms that maybe used to have very racial negative connotations, but when they're kind of transformed to call someone that who's actually Dominican and who society recognizes as Dominican, even though they're black, it kind of becomes a light term or a joke or not negative. But when that same term, at least a couple of these terms are applied to Haitians, then it still means negative. So over time, I think in the language, it's weird. It's weird. You can use the same word to describe very different types of people now, but people have certainly ways of identifying the difference between Dominicans and Haitian kids. And not to say, I think over time, you definitely see in the schools, like I say, Dominicans who had Haitian friends or friends of Haitian, ancestry. You could really see that they were just so much more, less xenophobic, so much less xenophobic, so much, more ready to not even notice those differences than people who were still kind of segregated, either because of their school area or whatever. So, I think there's definitely optimism, but yeah, cause for optimism.
Following up on Francisco's question, I know historically Dominicans claim that they didn't have Africa.
That was a question that I asked.
Because they have the indigenous.
Right. Which is very interesting. So most people agree, most historians and sociologists agree that the Dominicans today do not have any indigenous blood. The indigenous were killed so fast that they just don't. And so that's exactly right. So when I asked this question of where do Haitians descend from, people said African, just African. And when I asked, and our options were African, European, indigenous. And when Dominican, it was European and indigenous. And so that's what I was trying to get at, which is inaccurate historically. But again, some of this was written in the textbooks at the time. I don't know, I haven't studied the textbook since 2007, but yeah.
Yeah, but they do refer to themselves as the Mulatto Republic. And mulattoes, I guess, initially.
So
I understand it's a mixture of black and Spanish.
yeah, so educated, certainly educated Dominicans understand. This isn't, I hope I'm not generalizing too much. People understand, here's what it comes from, and I'm writing about this in my current magazine story, is that Dominicans who are educated understand this, but Dominicans are among the most undereducated people in the world. The OECD put out a report a couple years ago that said, I think the Dominican Republic is the 7th worst country in the world in terms of quality of either primary education or overall education, and the other one was like 13th. So here's a middle-income nation, had the second fastest growing economy in Latin America last year, and all these other economic metrics doing quite well, very much a middle-income country now overall. And they have, Dominicans are often kind of, many who are undereducated kind of associate African as being backwards and that sort of thing. But I'm going to point out in this article that most Dominicans would be better off if they had been plucked out at age 3 and put in a school in Togo, in Mali, in wherever. They would get a better education than do in the DR. And so that's part of the problem, is that the education system is so poor in the Dominican Republic that, sure, an educated Dominican will understand these nuances, will understand their heritage, but Dominicans are very, very, very undereducated, unfortunately. Yeah.
When they had that great massacre in Trujillo, the people that they massacred, it wasn't distinguished by skin color, but it had a lot of dark Dominicans, but rather by the fact whether they trilled their own.
Born in the Dominican Republic are now at risk of being stateless. And so this has been in the news a little bit, talking about a new class of stateless people. Though some conservatives would argue, conservatives on the issue of immigration would argue these people were always meant to be Haitian and not Dominican in the first place. Legally, that doesn't really stand up for the most part. I'm writing about that. Dominican courts have ruled that that's the case, but international courts have largely said that's not true at all. It's still a little bit up for debate, but basically, pretty recently, it's been codified into law that these people, 230,000 people, are not Dominican, even though they were born here and they went to Dominican citizenship, who are descendants of Haitians, right? So people whose grandfathers and grandmothers worked sugarcane, came over years ago, came under Trujillo decades and decades ago. The question is, do we grant, are these people allowed to be Dominican? And that's being asked not just publicly in media in the Dominican Republic, but also now legally. So over the past 10 years, there's been a series of court decisions, of legislation, and presidential decrees that combined have essentially taken a large group of people who are born in the Dominican Republic, hundreds of thousands of people, who are now being told, you are not Dominican. Say racist illustrations of African slaves and Haitian leaders actually in the books that had some of these textbooks had blatantly wrong, incorrect information about Haiti and things like that. And this was 8 years ago. And so now there's a new national curriculum, but at the time, a graduating high school senior, graduating from Dominican high school, would have taken some sort of unit in like a social studies class on Dominican-American relations. Never would they have taken any sort of unit, at least not mandatory, on Dominican-Haitian relations. And it's just this really interesting dynamic to me. You have two countries stuck on an island, and this is somewhat because your parents came from Haiti. And these are people, for the most part, the majority, they don't speak Creole anymore. There's several generations down. Most of them have never been to Haiti. So it'd be like, coming here, and if there are descendants here of, German immigrants or Polish immigrants, people who don't speak German or Polish, and we're being told, okay, you're not American anymore, and you may in fact be deported back to Poland or Germany, in the coming months. I mean, that's what's happening with some of these people. And so I'm writing about the situation, writing about the legalities of it a little bit. But there's a situation in which, by best estimates, 230,000 people in the Dominican Republic, true in Haiti too, but certainly in the Dominican Republic, which I've studied, there's just very little attention paid to Haiti, given that they're stuck on an island with Haiti, I think. So I find that very interesting. I'd love to hear people's thoughts about that, if people disagree with kind of my very rushed presentation of different ways in which Dominican society discuss Haitian and Haitian topics. But what I'm working on now is the latest iteration of all this is that over the past 10 years, the Dominican Republic has progressively started to exclude a group of people